The key word in today's story is real estate. That's right. Today's story is about real estate. He got scammed. Yes, he was scammed. So, without further ado, let's get started. Let's go. Today's story is about Dolby. Dolby was a friend of mine from university. I may not have mentioned this before, but I majored in law. Dolby was also a law student, and he majored in civil law. After graduating, he obtained his real estate agent license. After getting his license, he worked hard in the real estate industry for quite some time. Then, after building up about 6 or 7 years of experience in the field, he suddenly started thinking, I work in real estate. I help other people buy and sell properties all the time. But how long can I keep living on rent? Maybe it's time for me to buy a home of my own. But as I mentioned earlier, real estate in Korea is extremely expensive. And even after working for 6 or 7 years, once you factor in military service, you're still only in your late 20s or early 30s. Dolby was about 29 years old at the time. He had worked hard and saved money, but he simply hadn't been able to save enough to buy a home. And although he worked in real estate, the business was essentially self-employed. Because of that, getting a large loan wasn't exactly easy either. The one thing that caught Dolby's attention was something called a court auction. He had heard that many real estate professionals around him had purchased properties through court auctions and then resold them. So, through some of his senior colleagues in the real estate industry, he gradually began learning about court auctions. Then, a property came up in an area where he had always wanted to live. Since Dolby himself worked in real estate, he carefully analyzed the auction rights associated with the property. He thoroughly checked everything, including the priority rights that determine which liens are extinguished, the property register, the auction property description, and even the confirmed dates of existing leases. He went through everything extremely carefully, and apart from one single issue, the property seemed almost perfect. The house itself was in excellent condition, the location was ideal, and there didn't appear to be any major problems. The only thing that caught his attention was a single phrase. There was a lien holder claiming a right of retention, but that claim had no opposing legal force against the successful auction buyer. However, these kinds of occupants without opposing rights are actually quite common. When you purchase a property through a court auction, the original owner may have been renting the property out, or they may have been living there themselves. But if the court has already determined that the occupant has no opposing rights against the new owner, then, in a way, it is considered a relatively safe property. So Dolby thought, this is mine, and decided to participate in the auction. Fortunately, he won the property at a price lower than he had expected. After paying the remaining balance and successfully transferring ownership of the property, there was only one task left. He had to get the occupant out. Since the person occupying the property had no legal right to oppose the new owner, Dolby assumed that the person would leave fairly quickly if he offered some money to cover moving expenses. He was quite confident about the situation. However, when he tried to contact the original owner, the person simply wouldn't answer the phone. Dolby even went to the property himself and knocked on the door. He sent formal legal notices as well, but the person continued to ignore him. The occupant seemed to be inside the house, but refused to respond in any way. At that point, Dolby thought, this person is really malicious. There's no point wasting any more time trying to negotiate. I'll just proceed legally. So he applied for a court order to deliver possession of the property. In simple terms, a property possession order is a legal procedure through which the court can forcibly remove someone from a property. After applying for the possession order, the court's decision was formally served, but the occupant still refused to leave, so the next step was a forced eviction. Dolby went to the property together with court enforcement officers. They issued a final warning and prepared to forcibly open the door. The day of the eviction finally arrived. A locksmith was called, and they began breaking through the electronic door lock at the entrance. Normally, if someone hears people outside trying to break open their front door, especially after hearing that several people have arrived, they would at least come out to see what was happening. But this person remained completely silent. When they finally opened the door and entered, the house was surprisingly clean. Before this case, Dolby had accompanied some of his senior colleagues on several forced evictions. and according to him, they were rarely simple. Some occupants would deliberately smash every single tile in the house. Others would tear up the flooring or destroy the tiles before leaving. There were all kinds of people who would intentionally damage the property. But when Dolby entered this house, he was surprised. Everything was incredibly clean. Most of the belongings had already been removed, and the house looked almost completely empty. For a moment, Dolby even thought, maybe I shouldn't have gone through with the forced eviction. Maybe I should have given the occupant more time to move out. But then, as soon as they opened the door and stepped inside, they noticed a smell. There was a very distinct odor in the house. Despite how clean everything looked, there was a strange, unpleasant smell, something resembling cheap incense mixed with the smell of mold. It was a very unpleasant odor. Dolby thought, maybe the place hasn't been ventilated. Maybe it wasn't cleaned properly. Maybe it only looks clean because all the belongings are gone. Then he remembered the original owner, the person who had been living there before. She was a woman in her late 40s. The bailiff went over to her and said, "We're going to begin the eviction now. Please move aside. You have to leave now." But she didn't really resist at all. Normally, some people lie down on the floor, curse at everyone, and cause a huge scene. But this woman simply stood up very calmly. "All right," she said, as if she had completely accepted the situation and started to leave. But then, all of a sudden, she vomited violently right in the middle of the room. She suddenly let out a loud, retching ugh and began vomiting. But this wasn't the kind of vomiting you might see after someone has had too much to drink. It was violent, uncontrollable vomiting, as if everything inside her was being emptied out. She vomited all over the floor, making an absolute mess. There was nothing they could do about it. Someone had to clean it up. While the woman was being escorted outside and the other bailiffs were removing the remaining belongings, the former owner of the house suddenly said something to Dolby as she was leaving. She glared at Dolby and said, "Law? Fine. Go ahead and do everything according to the law you love so much. But I'm going to leave something here behind. Let's see how much you can handle. Let's see." Then, as if nothing had happened, she wiped her mouth, gave him a strange smile, and walked out. But even Dolby just thought, well, I guess that's what I should expect. Maybe she's cursing the house because I took it from her. He simply laughed it off. Still, Dolby wanted to get rid of the unpleasant feeling in the house and remove any traces left behind by the previous occupant. So he hired a professional cleaning company. They thoroughly cleaned the entire house, including a full steam cleaning. After that, he completely renovated the interior as well. He replaced the wallpaper and made the place look as clean and new as possible. Eventually, Dolby moved in and began living there. And it was around that time that strange things began to happen to him. As many of you probably expected, Dolby suddenly began experiencing sleep paralysis almost every night. He kept having the same nightmare. A woman would appear and climb on top of him. Then she would repeatedly say, "This is my house. My house. This is my house," over and over again. But strange things also began happening in real life. Dolby worked in real estate, and suddenly, one problem after another began to occur. A transaction would suddenly fall apart. He would accidentally fail to fulfill a legal duty to provide required information, resulting in a lawsuit. Deals would collapse at the last minute. Everything seemed to be going wrong at once. People who work in real estate often face situations where their reputation can easily become involved in disputes. It can also be a very exhausting profession when you become entangled in legal proceedings. And for Dolby, it felt as if everything was going wrong at the same time. He kept thinking, what am I supposed to do? What do I do now? Then there was another mutual friend that Dolby and I both knew. His name is Chulson. Some of you may not have heard about him before, so let me explain. Chulson isn't a shaman, but his family has always had a strong connection to spiritual matters, and, as people often say, he seems to have a natural sensitivity to supernatural things. One day, Dolby and Chulson were having a drink together, but the moment Chulson saw Dolby, his expression suddenly became completely serious. Chulson suddenly became completely serious. Did you go somewhere strange? What happened to you? Then he suddenly grabbed his nose and began clutching his head, complaining that he had a terrible headache. You know I told you not to go to strange places. Where have you been wandering around? Dolby was understandably frustrated. I haven't been anywhere. I just moved. I recently moved into a new house. That's the only thing that's happened. But Cholson shook his head. Don't give me that nonsense. There's something around you. That smell. He kept talking like that. Dolby insisted. No, seriously. I'm telling you the truth. I haven't done anything unusual. The only strange thing is this house. Nothing else has happened to me. Finally, Cholson said, Then let's go to your house. So Dolby took Cholson back to his new home. But the moment Cholson opened the door and stepped inside, he suddenly began vomiting as well. The moment Cholson entered the house, he suddenly started vomiting violently. After wiping his mouth, his expression completely changed. His eyes looked almost vacant. Then, all of a sudden, he rushed into the living room and began smashing the wall with a vase-like object he found on the floor. The wall was covered with decorative art tiles, and he started smashing them one after another. Hey, what the hell are you doing? Do you have any idea how expensive that is? Dolby tried to stop him, but Cholson pushed him away. Shut up. You're worried about money right now? You're about to die, and you're worried about money? And he continued smashing the wall. Then Dolby suddenly became angry. Until that moment, he had believed that the previous owner's entire interior had been completely removed and that the house had been fully renovated. But then he realized what had actually happened. The interior contractors had done what is known in the industry as a cover-over renovation. Instead of removing the original materials, they simply left everything in place and installed new materials over the top of them. So the previous owner's belongings and anything they had left behind were still inside the walls. There was wallpaper underneath the new wallpaper. Cholson tore through the wallpaper and began exposing what was underneath. Normally, behind a wall, you would expect to find a concrete wall. But this wasn't concrete. There was something resembling plywood. Cholson broke through that as well, and when they looked inside, there was a talisman. The talismans we usually think of are written on yellow paper with red ink, but this one was different. When Cholson pulled it out, it was written on a grayish piece of paper with letters in a dark, almost blackish-red color. At first, Dolby couldn't even tell what the writing had been done with. Is that blood? Or what is that? It was a kind of talisman he had never seen before. The moment Cholson saw it, his body began trembling violently. After filtering out some of the stronger language, what he said was roughly, "That evil woman. This is not a normal talisman. This is Yangbap. This is Yangbap. She put a curse on this place to slowly kill whoever moved in. The smell in here is unbelievable." As he spoke, Cholson began searching through the entire house. He started tearing things apart and ripping open walls and floors, looking for more talismans. And the shocking part was this. Dolby's apartment was only about 23 pyong, roughly 76 square meters. It wasn't a large home at all, but inside that relatively small apartment, they found no fewer than 20 talismans. All of them were those dark, ominous-looking talismans. After seeing that, Dolby naturally sat down on the floor and began trembling. Dolby was still sitting there, unable to understand what was happening. Then Cholson said, "You believe in the law, right? But rights aren't only the rights recognized by the law. There are also rights connected to spiritual things. You moved into the wrong place." Cholson gathered up all the talismans and said that he would properly deal with them through his mother-in-law, who was experienced in spiritual matters. For the time being, he told Dolby, "Go stay at your family home. As long as you're somewhere else, away from that house, you should be fine." So Dolby left the house and returned to his family's home. After that, the talismans were apparently taken away and burned through a proper ritual process. Dolby was then supposed to renovate the house completely again before moving back in. But honestly, when something like that happens, it can really get into your head. So he couldn't bring himself to go back inside. Instead, he put the property back on the market and listed it for sale. After some time had passed, and he had managed to regain a little peace of mind, and his health had also begun to recover, he met Chulson again. Dolby asked Chulson, "What exactly happened? Can you tell me more about the things you weren't able to explain back then?" So Chulson began explaining. Many of you may already be familiar with the term Yangbap. According to Chulson, Yangbap is a form of curse or spiritual attack, and apparently it has two openings. If someone sends something out, part of it can supposedly return to the person who sent it. That means the person who placed the curse may not have been completely normal either. Chulson told Dolby, "Fortunately, you didn't live there for very long. That's probably why things ended with you only suffering to that extent. But you're definitely going to hear news about that person again. When you do, don't contact her. Don't get involved in anything. That's how you'll survive." Dolby listened and thought, so that's what happened. But only 2 days later, the court enforcement officer who had helped carry out the forced eviction contacted him. Normally, a court enforcement officer would never contact someone privately after a case has been completed. They are carrying out an official government duty after all. But this particular enforcement officer was the person who had personally escorted the former owner out of the property. One day, that officer called Dolby. "Excuse me, were you the person involved in that case at that villa complex, building number so-and-so?" "Yes, that's me. Is there something wrong? Have you noticed anything strange with your body?" "Have you experienced anything unusual?" Dolby asked. "Why are you asking me that?" The officer then explained, "Well, some of the people who were there that day apparently started feeling ill afterward. And recently, someone we know, a shaman, told us to look into that woman because she might have been involved in something dangerous. So I looked into her, and I heard that the former owner of the property had eventually been admitted to a psychiatric hospital and was being held in a locked ward." When Dolby heard the reason, he learned that shortly after being forcibly removed from the property, the former owner had apparently started walking around completely naked in the middle of the street, dancing and causing a disturbance. She was also carrying one of those long knives traditionally used by shamans and was reportedly threatening people with it. Eventually, she collapsed and was taken away. After receiving medical treatment, she was admitted to a psychiatric hospital and placed in a locked ward. The enforcement officers who had been present that day had apparently all become seriously ill afterward. Normally, the officer wasn't supposed to contact Dolby privately, but he had been worried that something might have happened to him as well, so he decided to reach out and check on him. After hearing that, Dolby learned what had happened to the former owner, the woman who was believed to have been involved in shamanistic practices, and that is where the story ends. After everything he had experienced, Dolby said something that stayed with me. "We go through so much effort to buy a home, but not everything is written in the property registry." And there was another aspect to this story. Sometimes the people involved can be genuinely frightening in the way they behave. And after this incident, something similar actually happened to Dolby again at a second property. He went through another court auction process, and afterward, the former owner of that property reportedly attacked him with a weapon. Dolby was actually injured. After experiencing things like that more than once, he eventually came to the conclusion, maybe I'm just not meant to buy a house. So these days, he lives in a rental property instead. I wanted to share this story because I think it's a reminder that when you're buying a property, you really do need to be extremely careful. A property may look perfect on paper, but there can be far more to a place than what appears in the official records.